Welcome to the Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Line-Miller, your host, and we are having another conversation with a very innovative company today. But first, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Farm to Plate, software company committed to creating tomorrow's food business ecosystem today. And today we have with us Ryan Zinn. He is the Regenerative Products Manager at Dr. Bronner's. Welcome to the podcast, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having me, Pam. This is great. I'm really excited.
Yes, I'm excited to dive in. And, Dr. Bronner's might not be a company that everyone has heard about. Can you tell us a little bit about how they got started?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess going back in deep history, Dr. Bronner's was actually founded about 75 years ago here in the United States by a German Jewish soap maker that fled Nazi Germany. He lost all of his family in the Holocaust and was really looking to sort of gain some, grounding here in the United States. And one way that he knew how to do this was basically by just making soap using his family recipe. And his whole sort of, kind of shtick at the time was to be able to sort of preach this message of, all of our sort of our focus here at Dr. Bronner's, which is all one. And so he was starting to sort of preach that, from, the East Coast to the West Coast, and then found that many people would come to take his soap but not listen to his actual message. So then he decided to put his message onto the soap label, and that launched Dr. Bronner's as a brand and the iconic soap label that's been around now for many decades.
Wow, that's pretty innovative a long time ago. And what a story, to lose everything and then kind of, as we say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get that old family recipe for soap and really make that into something. Now, he was on to, his premise for his soap and all-in-one product was really innovative at the time, but is kind of right on message for today's consumer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the unique things about Dr. Bronner's and really the liquid soap, which has kind of launched our brand over the years, is, like you say, it's kind of this all-in-one, multifunctional soap that's vegan. This really was kind of this counterculture darling small brand back during the 60s and the 70s. And over time really began to enter the mainstream as consumers became a little bit more, conscious of things like, ecological production, recycled plastic, and fair trade. Dr. Bronner's, has really looked to try to pioneer as much as possible everything we've done. So we were one of the first companies to actually go both organic and fair trade for our major raw materials for all of our ingredients for the soap. We were the first company to actually use 100% post-consumer recycled plastic for all of our packaging for our liquid bottles. And as such, we're trying to continually evolve and challenge both ourselves as well as the industry to really push the edge of the envelope in terms of, what does true sustainability look like, both for people and planet?
Yeah, I think you are definitely on the front end of that because other companies are trying to catch up in that space. A lot of them are, but that was some of the original premise of Dr. Bronner's initial product, the whole organically. Now the heirs that have taken over the company, I guess, they've continued on with that mission, right?
Indeed. So this is one of the greatest stories I've seen kind of in family businesses in a long time. As a family business, Emmanuel Bronner, launched Dr. Bronner 75 years ago this year. And over time, his grandsons, David and Mike Bronner, took over the company about, almost 20 years ago now. And they really had this really strong commitment to organic farming, fair trade, and to really begin to sort of build out kind of our ethical footprint, so to speak. So really, they sort of challenged the company at that time to transition all of our raw materials, things like coconut oil and palm oil, mint oil, for example, to organic. This was right at the time where we began to see in the marketplace the USDA organic seal that maybe people are familiar with. But nobody had really done this for soap. You might see organic coffee or organic, cereal, for example. But to actually have a product like soap or a body care product that actually had organic ingredients was actually pretty unique. But it really spoke to their commitment to producing something that was truly sustainable. And then what we quickly found over time was that despite the fact that we were buying organic certified ingredients and raw materials, we really wanted to have a better understanding of what was happening with all of the farmers, farm workers and factory workers that were producing all of these raw materials for our soaps. And that actually led us to create a number of vertically integrated fair trade supply chains, which means that we've invested around the world in places like Sri Lanka, India, Ghana, and Samoa to build out actual sort of sister companies that are able to supply a fair amount of our raw materials directly to Dr. Bronner's. This means we can actually have a direct impact in the lives of many, many farmers all around the world. And one of the biggest challenges for farmers is actually to have some value addition in the country where they are working. So that led us to create mills, to be able to sort of process a lot of these products, to be able to send to our factory in San Diego, California. And it also means that we have real transparency in what's happening on the ground. All too often, whether it's body care or in the food sector, you work with wholesalers or you work with brokers, and you have really no idea what's happening throughout your supply chain. We really wanted to dig deep and figure out what was going on and to be able to have some way to impact that in a positive way.
Wow. And that is very innovative, especially in the time frame that you were doing that, because to have a window in and actually feet on the ground with the farmers who are growing your source materials. And like you said, that whole organic label was so much more common for foods that we eat, but not necessarily products that we use that affect our bodies, like externally. And that whole idea, I mean, just the innovation, the innovative thinking at the time, and doing the right thing by the people that were really critical to having that good quality product. I mean, it is a lot of investment. You're trying to educate the farmers. You want to keep them farming. You want to provide some support in their communities. And like you said, if you're building mills in their area, possibly, that's also bringing more employment to the area. So it's all a positive up leveling all the way around. I just think that's great that Dr. Bronner's has committed to that investment in the different areas where they source materials. Yeah.
Indeed, I think our experience over the last 20 years has been that, one, we want to make sure that our product has high integrity, both from a social and ecological perspective. That's number one. And then two, we want to make sure that whatever we do around the world really has a sort of, I often think of it as kind of a lighthouse, in that we want to sort of provide a model that can be replicated and that can be scaled. We don't want to be the only company that's actually doing this. In fact, we really look to collaborate with other brands because the reality is that, even though Dr. Bronner's is a medium-sized company, there is so much work to be done, in rural communities around the world. And so that means that we get involved in not just working directly with farmers or building mills or commercializing sort of some of their harvest, but we also do a number of fair trade projects that really focuses on sort of rounding out the true sustainability of a local community, whether that's supporting, education, healthcare, really you name it. We just launched a plastic recycling project in Ghana this year as a way to provide not only additional income, but also provide different ways that we can actually clean up the environment. So we're really excited about trying out different ways to actually be a good sort of corporate citizen and to have a true impact on the ground.
Yeah. And you talk about the size of your company, but you source in, how many countries?
Yeah, so right now we source from about 20 countries all around the world, some parts of Europe, throughout Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, even in Latin America as well. And so really our goal is to be able to continue to, provide all of the raw materials necessary for Dr. Bronner's, of course, but we've also looked to diversify and sell to third parties. One thing that we really learned, and I think was really a key lesson from COVID is that you can't rely on one single customer. And so that means that we try to sell a lot of the production that we produce on the ground to third parties in Europe and in the United States, and also look for ways for farmers to diversify. So most farmers grow more than one crop, and it's one thing to actually have an organic premium and a fair price for farmers for that one thing that they produce, let's say coconuts for coconut oil. But the reality is that they produce a lot of other things as well. And so for them to have a really, truly, stable livelihood and a just livelihood, we are looking at different ways that we can actually commercialize and support their diversification, in large part because the world is a little bit of a crazy place. We're entering into this crazy cycle of, recession and climate change. And so we're looking for different ways to be able to support farmers. And to be quite honest with you, this is really kind of in our enlightened self-interest as well. One of the big takeaways from COVID, at least for me, was had we not had those long-term standing relationships with farmers and our local companies, we would have been, in deep trouble as far as being able to source and keep the lights on, so to speak. And so because I think we had that relationship, because we made that investment, we were able to weather sort of the disruptions in the early days of COVID a little bit better than other companies because of those relationships.
Yeah, you made the investment to build those partnerships way before there was some kind of need to test them, right? And the latecomer showing up and saying, "Oh, I need this or that." They're like, "Well, where have you been for the past however many years?" And you are making the investment and doing the right thing by what Dr. Bronner's values are, paying that forward. But there's a lot of other benefits too. You talked about diversification for the farmers to be able to grow different things. And that might not necessarily be something you need, but you're saying you're then trying to help them find additional buyers for those products. In other words, kind of just helping them figure out how to be able to sustain their ability to farm. Is that what I'm understanding?
Indeed, I think, our experience over the last probably 10 years or so now was one, Dr. Bronner's has always been a soap company. We really sort of, built up the brand on our liquid soap. That's probably the most iconic, product that we offer. And over time, we were able to develop and build out other product lines as well, including things like bar soap. And then we kind of, had this interesting moment in the marketplace where we were making this delicious, beautiful virgin coconut oil out of Sri Lanka, and the market was really just kind of all over the place. And our leadership made the great decision to launch a food product, which was our virgin coconut oil for cooking and body care, and that really launched us into a different way of in terms of how we saw ourselves as a company. To be able to expand and diversify beyond just soap was a huge step for us. But I also think it really paid dividends in terms of how we are perceived by both consumers and retailers, but also provided another outlet for farmers. That then led us to take that similar experience and look beyond virgin coconut oil and look at other products as well. So, we were working with farmers in West Africa, in Ghana, over the course of the last 10 years or so. They supply all of our organic and fair trade palm oil. But as I mentioned, farmers grow a lot of other stuff, including cocoa. And so we worked really hard to transition them towards organic farming practices and supporting that process, and began selling to third parties, primarily in Europe, because they saw the value in a really high quality cocoa product that was organic and fair trade coming out of West Africa. And over time, we were thinking, wow, we're doing all this extra work, to help supply other brands, which is great. But ultimately, we should, figure out a way to do something like that ourselves. And so based upon that experience, we launched a chocolate line almost 2 years ago now, that really looks to source from many of our projects and partners all of these different raw materials to create a new product line that can really highlight their story, highlight the sort of health and environmental aspects, and then be able to sort of diversify what we do as well. So that's been a really a great learning experience, and allows for us a different way to have an impact. And I think really one of the sort of underpinnings of the fair trade model is really it's what we call trade, not aid. The idea is that we want to create really just trading relationships. We're not a charity, we're not a foundation. We don't want to give money away necessarily, or even exclusively, but what we want to do is sort of make a big impact for trade. And so we saw that as one of the best ways to do that.
Yeah. And I like that you're helping the farmers be able to, stay in their farming, and you're giving them the resources to do that, partnering with them. Like you said, you're not a charity organization, but you are providing a lot of resources to help those farmers either source their products in other ways. It's also helped Dr. Bronner's move from products we use outside of our body to products that are consumable, that still have that. That's what I'm hearing here. You move to the coconut oil and the chocolate, and who knows what's next. I mean, you might know what's next, but just enabled you as a benefit to what you're doing and how you're trying to make this a positive all the way around. You're able to expand your business as well. And I think that's a great model for other businesses. You talked about you're not a huge company, but there's a lot more businesses that are your size than are the huge companies, and they can look to you as a model of how to operate responsibly and in a way that works well for everyone. I mean, I know it costs extra money to do that, just to think that way, but you're the regenerative projects manager. So tell me, what kinds of regenerative projects are happening at Dr. Bronner's? other than what we've already talked about, like what does that mean to be the regenerative products manager? I'm not going to say that anymore because I messed it
No problem.
up.
So, I would say one thing that's relatively unique about our team is, we have a team that really is dedicated to accompanying and working with farmers and our factories all around the world. And really that's a big investment. Most brands and most companies, that's an extra cost that they probably have a hard time justifying. And so because one of the things that we're really clear on is we want to make sure that all of our products really have this integrity. The Bronner family has really invested in this capacity as a team to be able to do that. And so that means that we have to ensure everything that happens at the farm gate, the farm, all the way till it reaches our factory in San Diego, really has all of those elements incorporated and really embedded. So for us, that means making sure that all of our projects and products are organic certified, fair trade certified, and regenerative organic certified, which is a new certification that has come out in the last couple of years that really focuses on soil health and climate change. We need to make sure that we are, in fact, doing what we are claiming to do. That means we are audited by third-party certifiers for everything from, human rights to, the use of chemicals, all the way up to the product that we produce. And then a part of that, what we want to do is we want to ensure that we can have a real holistic approach at all of our projects. So some of the ways we do that is by focusing on our fair trade fund. We add an additional percentage on top of all payment is made to farmers and farm workers that go into development projects, all of which is great. We also look to create other additional support projects beyond that, because we really figure out that, to have a truly stable and sustainable, sort of community, it's not just a transactional fair price for a fair payment, those types of things. So we just launched a Montessori school in Ghana just a few weeks ago. And this was in large part in response to a lot of the women that worked at the factory. What they said is that what we want to do is we really want to continue to work here, but childcare is a big challenge for us. We want to make sure that we can afford to send our children to school. So after a lot of discussions with a lot of the women and staff, what we found out is we wanted to create a primary school that really responded to their needs. So the women that worked at the factory could feel comfortable taking their children to school, leaving them there, know that they would get good instruction and that they were in a safe place while they were at work, and that everybody kind of wins. And so those are some of our approaches that really focus on things that probably have zero to do with creating ingredients for a soap, but really allow for us to have a real positive impact on the ground. And ultimately, it's in our best interest. I'd be perfectly honest with you. One of the things I see around the world, including the United States, is that our farmers are aging out. The average age of a farmer is upwards of 59, 60 years old. And there's not a whole lot of younger people getting particularly interested in farming, in part because the conditions and the pay are pretty miserable in most cases. So our goal is to try to create an environment that is welcoming for young farmers. And that really starts at a very young age. So whether that's a Montessori school in Ghana, or looking for providing opportunities for young farmers in other parts of the world, we really see that as part of, kind of developing this pipeline to support people as they kind of come into the quote unquote system.
Yeah, that whole community development, and you're talking about like the women's issues that want to work with you, but trying to solve the problems for them or overcome the obstacles. And that's one way in which you can serve that community and enable those farmers and those workers to keep doing what they've been doing. But you're also giving back, like in the agricultural area, you talked about like replanting things. And can you share a little bit about that? How you're...
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the advantages that we have as a company is many of our raw materials come what we call perennial crops. So these are trees mostly that you don't have to plant in and year out, like let's say corn or wheat, for example. And so as a result, anytime you plant a tree, that is a big investment, because oftentimes it takes a couple of years to start to produce, at least commercial, volumes. And it's a long-term commitment to that tree. So many of the trees that, we are sourcing from are, older than I am, they're 80 years old, sometimes 90 years old. And so when a farmer makes that type of investment, we want to make sure that it's justified in a way. And so what we've been doing over the course of the last couple of years is supporting farmers with both training, but also financing, and in some cases, outright grants. to replant many of their fields in what we call agroforestry. So this is basically an approach that is farming with trees, right? And so oftentimes we think about farming and it's just this annual crop that we sort of harvest and we plow under, all of which is fine. We all like corn and wheat and soy. But nonetheless, I think there's a real value to this agroforestry system because it allows farmers to really diversify, have a long-term approach to farming, and it allows them a little bit more flexibility when it comes to sort of market and climate shocks. So for example, in West Africa, they saw a reduction in yields last year for both palm and for cocoa. What we wanted to make sure is in the event that there's any type of yield reduction or the prices go haywire, that they have other options as well. And this is a win-win, really. It allows for farmers to be much more stable. They can feed their families. They can produce more on less land. And ultimately, it allows for our projects to be able to really be, sometimes the term gets thrown out a lot, but kind of like climate neutral. Anytime we think about any type of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, farming actually contributes a fair amount of that. And so by planting these perennial agroforestry systems, we're actually able to sequester carbon from the atmosphere and put it back into the soil where it belongs. So really, it's truly a win-win. And our goal really is to be able to support farmers as they sort of convert much of their land back to this more traditional way of farming by creating the sort of infrastructure for that, the financing, the marketplace, the processing, et cetera, that allows them to actually make that investment. So that's been really part of our pathway the last couple of years. And it also provides another way for farmers to, hey, I can make some money out of this and not just live, harvest to harvest.
Right. And that's, just the continuity of their ability to farm is really the whole focus there. And again, identifying what the challenges are and then trying to find solutions and ways to overcome them. You talked earlier about, recycling a recycling plastics project. And I know you do some different offsetting. Can you share that with our audience as well?
Yeah, indeed. One of the big challenges I think for most companies these days is really doing a legitimate and true inventory of greenhouse gases and your carbon footprint. It's really challenging. It's not so difficult to figure out, okay, well, how much electricity did I use this month? But as you get down into your supply chain, trying to figure out all of your transportation, emissions, especially anytime you do at production level, that's not very easy to calculate. And we've been working on that for a number of years. And especially when it comes to agriculture, sort of understanding the carbon cycle is more maybe art than science, but we're working on it. And so what we've tried to figure out is focusing on a couple of different things. One, we use a fair amount of plastic. And so the reality is that despite the fact that all of our plastic is post-consumer recycled, the reality is much of those plastic bottles are not recycled again. And so there's a huge challenge in sort of the packaging world right now to come up with packaging that actually is truly ecological, is in fact recyclable. There's a lot of places that, just quite frankly, municipalities that don't offer plastic recycling. So ultimately that goes into a landfill. So what we want to do is figure out how to truly take responsibility for our plastic footprint. And we've tried to figure out, looking at different ways to do that. And the offset market is one where you work with a third party and you try to sort of reduce, sort of net out more or less what you've, produced. And in reality, we found that to be a little bit, not really matching kind of like our expectations. Offsets are great as sort of this transition moment, but I don't really know if they make a true long-lasting impact. So what we've been trying to focus on for both plastic and for greenhouse gases is insetting, focusing primarily within our own supply chain to address any issues as opposed to buying offsets from a third party. So that means that we're focusing primarily on reducing our carbon footprint, both on farm, but also at all of our factories, and then also addressing things like plastic as well. That means by collecting plastic all the areas where we're working to ensure that we're able to sort of address that within our supply chain. We're starting that first pilot in Ghana, and then depending upon how well that goes, we may be able to expand that out to other countries. But these are all kind of the scenario where you're kind of building the plane while you're flying it. So we're hoping to learn a lot over the course of the next couple of months and years as we begin to deploy this out a little bit more. But I really think the future, for any sort of business or social enterprise is really looking at insets, which is sort of addressing your own supply chain if you can. I know it's challenging, and it's great to be able to buy carbon or plastic or water offsets as needed until you're able to actually do that within your own supply chain. But I think that's really the ultimate goal as in terms of taking responsibility for what you do.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. I think it's so much better to have that introspective look at what you're doing and how you might be able to change that to, like you said, instead of buying the offsets, to look internally and figure out how you can do better and mitigate some of the challenges that you're, continuing to have with what emissions you're putting into the environment or whatever that might be that's happening in your supply chain. One more thing that's really curious and really unique about Dr. Bronner's is in your pay scales, how you do that corporately. I think that a lot of corporations will be surprised at how you do your pay structure. If you could share that with us.
Yeah, I would say, Dr. Bronner's is really unique in this regard. As a family company, the family could probably be gazillionaires at this point, having, been running the company for many years, even if they were to do everything organic and fair trade. But they've been really, really focused on ensuring that we kind of like walk our talk. And in that regard, all executive pay is capped at 5-1. So if the family members and our leadership would like a raise, everybody else gets a raise. And so that part I think is relatively unique in this day and age, considering that executive compensation at other companies could be, hundreds, if not thousands times more than their lowest paid employee. And we also make sure that we really focus on a living wage for everybody in the company. That means that they can actually afford to live a dignified life wherever they live. And so the majority of our staff, and workers live in San Diego County in California. And to be able to do that, we also provide a fair amount of other benefits, including profit sharing. Dr. Bronner's is one of the only companies that provides pretty much 100% healthcare. We have no deductible, and that allows for us to be able to make sure that we are really taking care of our team, in large part. And because we have this cap on executive pay, that also gives us additional funding to be able to provide money to great causes. And so since we're actually going on 20 years now, we've given away over $100 million to great causes, and everything from increasing the minimum wage. Certainly, we've worked on animal welfare issues and other campaigns. Of late, we've focused quite a bit on funding great treatment and research regarding psychedelic medicine and mental health. And so we've been really looking at different ways that we can have an impact beyond just sort of our business footprint. And that's one thing that I think is really sort of inspiring for a company to do. Ultimately, they could just kind of, the family could just sort of, take on those profits. But we've just been really focused on giving away, millions of dollars each year to great causes on positive impacts, both, domestically and internationally as well.
Yeah, that is really unique. Thank you so much for sharing that. We have covered a lot of different topics here today.
Indeed.
And thank you for bringing, some of the uniqueness of Dr. Bronner's to our audience, because, it's not in the news every day. And I think it's important to see what some companies are doing out there and how they're making a difference. Ryan, is there anything else you would like to share with our audience before we go today?
Well, I would just say, our chocolate is delicious, and you can actually find it at many more retailers and even online. So I would encourage people to either check out our web store and our website, which is drbronner's.com, and certainly take a look for soap or chocolate when you next time in the grocery aisle, because the chocolate's delicious and it goes to a great cause.
Ryan, thank you so much for being on our podcast today. And we're excited to be able to share Dr. Bronner's with our audience. I also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Farm to Plate, enabling better food supply chain management today. You can find out more at farmtoplate.io.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.